Welcome to Larnaca Conferences number 2, the conference on economy. Our topic today is how and why the growth-motivated and globally ruling economy of today fires our waste of energy and natural resources and thereby eats up our means to build the infrastructure of renewable energy for the future. We welcome to this conference Dr. Petra Künkel. Dr. Petra Künkel is a transformation expert, thought leader, renowned author, and leading strategic advisor for global sustainable transformations. As an executive committee member of the Club of Rome and CEO of the Collective Leadership Institute, she empowers leaders to take decisive action for our planetary future. She's advocate for regenerative civilizations and new economic architecture that serves planet and people. Petra, our first question here is, what are the key pillars that make our current growth focuses economic system so dangerous, part 1? And what needs to happen to repurpose economies as part 2?
Yeah, these are, of course, two really big questions that cannot be answered within a short minute. But I think what is clear, and COVID-19, the pandemic has shown it even more, is that we are all connected and then we handle our planet not in the right way. So if I look at the pillars that go wrong, then the one pillar is primacy of monetary values. So we operate with a mindset of extraction and exploitation of nature, exploitation of people, and everything becomes a commodity. So that really needs to change. Then it's a kind of human omnipotency. So it's a disconnect from the awareness that we actually are part of the planet. We are part of evolution. And the third is, I would say, a collective irresponsibility in terms of, that we are all ingrained. So there may be some culprits, but I think we are all part of it, that the short-term interest always overrides the long-term care. And care is the term that we really need to bring back into economic thinking.
Thank you. Would repurposing economies towards life enhancement not mean that we have to dismantle our current economic system and start from scratch? Or can we rebuild economy within the current parameters?
Yeah, let me show some slides and go through and see what actually is it that we need, because we need kind of a new North Star in terms of repurposing economies.
Yes.
So that is exactly what we need to do. And it's not going to be an easy job, but I do think it is possible to do that. Mm-hmm. Okay, wait a minute. So the issue around life economies is the question, how do we find human prosperity on a flourishing planet? Because it cannot be a trade-off between human prosperity and the planet, which is the case at the moment. At the moment, we are actually in a planetary emergency. We're not only in a climate emergency, we're in a planetary emergency. There are more issues than climate, or let's say it's all connected, like biodiversity and ocean acidification, etc. And this is globally caused by an economic behavior that is self-destructive. Mm-hmm. It's exploitative, as I said, it's greedy, and it's ignorant. And now, that has been the case. We need to be honest with ourselves in socialism, in communism, and in capitalism. But it is kind of accelerated by the neoliberal narrative, which is so deeply ingrained in everything we do everywhere in the world. And that, the one name that is connected, there are many names, the one name that is connected with that narrative, of course, is Milton Friedman. And we remember that this narrative is the sole goal of the economy is financial wealth. Mm. Freedom of the individual is more important than the collective. Governments should be small and not steer more than kind of jump in if something goes wrong. And the hope that the free market will always sort things out. So we all know that this is totally and utterly the wrong direction. It may have worked for a while, but it's not really the direction. So we need to get rid of this, or we need to pick those things that have helped us in the past and then move towards a completely different future. So the question is, how could we rearrange our global economic architecture in a way that it stops extracting life and instead regenerates and fosters our life support system? The planet is our life support system, but our social systems are our life support system. So in that way, we can really say there is already a new narrative emerging. If you look at literature on new economic approaches, it's quite interesting to see that there are so many different approaches. You can almost say, wow, like there may be too many. Mm-hmm. The most known are probably the circular economy, because this is like in the discussion process, and there are cities like Amsterdam or other cities that really look at circular cities, etc. What is also quite known, particularly in Germany, is the common good economy, like having different kind of balance sheets and looking at what is the impact on people and the planet. And what is coming up much more is the term well-being economy. And there are even five governments in the world now who say, we actually develop well-being economy indicators. But there are many more approaches, and it's quite interesting to look at what's the paradigm shift behind these approaches. And it's definitely the responsibility for a livable future. It is transforming the global and local economic system, a big job, and not be done within a week. And it is a paradigm that says we need to restore, improve, and maintain the ecological and social life support systems. Most of you may have heard about the planetary boundaries. I mean, this is one model that shows that we have to actually have a prosperity within limits. So it is about repurposing the economies, and that is, for the first time, a really, really strong call to say, we need to talk about the purpose of businesses. We need to talk about the purpose of economies. We need to even talk about the purposes of state economies, etc., etc. So that would be shifting towards life economies as a general term, because they are in service of life. They integrate individual and collective well-being, and they look at the interplay between people and nature. And life economies also include ecosystems and social vitality in their balance sheets. So that's not a side issue then anymore, or environment is not a side issue, but it's part of what a good economic behavior is, or a good economic concept is. So it is about adopting a stewardship approach to global and local commons. That could be air, that could be nature parks, that could be soil, that could be different elements, ocean, etc. So, and redefining what our global commons are is very important. And they take care of the fair distribution of resources, income, and prosperity. I think it's by now clear that we will only overcome the crisis that we are in terms of planetary emergency, if we also look at the overcoming the social disparity and the income and wealth disparities that we have at the moment, because in that way it's outrageous. If we looked at nature wouldn't function like that. And I think social systems and human systems also wouldn't function like that. So life economies operate in accordance with the planetary boundaries, the planetary life support system, and they follow principles that generate social and ecological vitality. If we look a little bit closer at all these different economic approaches that I've shown before, it is quite interesting to extract the principles behind all these different new economic approaches. And we come up with things that aren't actually so outrageously new. That is quite interesting. So we look at definitely at regulations. We do have a lot of regulations. Some companies want more regulations, some companies want less, but we need to find regulations that guide us. And we need to shift into an economic mindset of contribution. That is extremely important. And the next point is to say, how do we create a system, also a material flow of circularity, and how do we have economic entities that actually contribute to regeneration, and not just as a side issue, as a corporate social responsibility issue, but that needs to be part and parcel of the way of producing or having services, etc. And then there's another point that is so interesting that is also in the discussion at the moment is how far do we need to localize and contextualize economic approaches? And yes, we don't want to get rid of the globalization. The globalization has many advantages. However, we need kind of rebalance it with local bioeconomies, local approaches, etc. And the next part is innovation and adaptability. So the question is, how do we guide innovation so that the inventiveness, the human inventiveness, which is great, technology, digitalization, is really serving economies of the future, serving sustainability transformations, and being able to look at economic strategies and adapt them on a regular basis. And then what we already have, and we need to kind of build this further, is how do we ensure transparency of economic activities and accountability? Because at the moment we have a situation where not all costs are actually in the products that we buy or that we trade with. And the transparency and traceability of products is, let's say, limited. But a lot has happened to change this in the last couple of years, particularly for responsible value chains. And then the question is, what is the political system that needs to underpin economic activities? And what's the role of the state in terms of wealth distribution, in terms of guiding markets, in terms of ensuring people's participation in economic activities, but also people's participation in looking at economic strategies? So all things actually need to be knitted together for life economies.
Thank you. The question that arises here, especially when we think about children who are frightened of their own future, is what needs to happen to bring the new parameters you are talking about into mainstream. Can we bring the new economic approaches together, especially when we think about global problems? China and the US, for example, who are again building blocks in order to work in their own interest and not in the global interest. So that is important here to know what can we do to bring these new economic approaches in a way together that everybody can work with.
I believe that it's going to be the job of all of us for the next, 10, 20, 30 more years. The issue is, and that's the conundrum, we probably won't be able to dismantle our current economies. We may be able to dismantle the paradigm, and that is extremely important. If we shift the purpose and the paradigm towards life enhancement, I think that is kind of a new North Star, and that's going to be extremely important. But we will not be able to dismantle our current economic flows and economic systems completely. So number one, because some of it actually is quite helpful, and so we should keep it. And number two, it's just not possible. We can't stop. It's like I always say, kind of having a highway cross, and you need to kind of rebuild the highway cross while the full traffic. Yeah,
especially because it's a systemic problem, and exactly. We cannot solve it with linear solutions.
So that's our task. We have to actually rebuild this highway crossing while the traffic is still flowing. So that's the task. And so the two key questions for transformed economies is how does what we do serve people on planet? And that's a question that everybody from consumer to producer to large and small companies to governments, etc., need to ask themselves. And combined with a cross-check, are we doing harm? Is there any chance that we do harm? And if not, it's okay. How can we prevent it? So this means that these parameters, the North Star for economic activities, will completely change. And this is something we can do. We can ask this question all the time. I'm not saying at this stage that everybody can answer, can respond to this question all the time. And if we look at China, if we look at other big nations, then I must say, even for China, I must say they are thinking about it.
Mhm.
They're not really adopting an approach that I would like to see, because I do think democracy is the fundamental part of new life economies in the future. However, even in China, they now understand that wealth distribution is extremely important and that ecological safety is extremely important. However, a long way to go. So the issue is we need to knit these new parameters into the existing system in order to gradually change the system. And we need to fundamentally change the narrative. I believe the good news is that some of these parameters are already tried and tested. Some are conceptualized, some are implemented, and I may just kind of have a look at what is already happening, if that's okay.
Yes.
So let me just check the screen. So we looked at the different principles, and so let's just go into the detail of each of the principles, because in terms of regeneration and circularity, it's really about production and consumption cycles, and this is hard work for everybody, not only the big companies in responsible value chains, but it's like everywhere, everything that we order online or that we buy in shops, etc. We need to look at what is the purpose of it, and what's the net zero negative impact, or the regeneration potential. But regeneration also refers to social systems. So Tim, the topic of care and the topic of role of families or communities will play a completely different role in future. What is really interesting is that a lot in this direction is already happening, like organic agriculture, like agroecology, like ecosystem services valuation, renewable energy systems, cradle-to-cradle approaches. So if you look through that lens of a principle of regeneration and circularity, suddenly the world opens up, and there are so many people that are actually doing this, and small projects and new approaches, etc. And it's extremely important to actually bring them together. If we look at the principle of localization and contextuality, then this is really the question: how do we properly or appropriately balance globalization with contextual approaches and with local approaches that actually strengthen regional material flows, regional product flows, regional economies, including strengthening communities, small-scale farmers, but also kind of an identity of people around their local economy. And this is so important because it also brings us back to cultural value systems that are so important. And luckily, we are a humankind with very, very different culture and very, very different the kind of value sets, etc. So that is extremely important. But even this is already kind of in the beginning, in the making. It is happening, like the support for regional material flow and shared ownership between different people, and kind of also looking at it, the right balance between smaller and larger economic entities. I see a future where we won't have the big Googles and Facebooks and the big Microsofts, but that may be far away. But the step in between is really to look at how the different entities interact and develop trusted relationships. Mm-hmm. And it's about the inclusion of marginalized people. That happens in many projects. I've just had a workshop with the WTO yesterday where it's really about supporting people to become part of empowering value chains, not extractive value chains. So if you look at the principles of adaptability and innovation, then this is really about research for life-enhancing technologies. The huge topic of digitalization and artificial intelligence really needs to be directed or redirected towards the question: how does it support life economies? How does it support the transformation to sustainability? And so the examples that we have is kind of a new conception of quality that is already there, that part of the quality, kind of the ecological impact needs to be part of quality. The regenerative product innovation, there's a lot happening at the moment. It's not only renewable energy, it's like biomimicry, it's like looking at biodegradable products, etc. And it's really the guided technological and social innovation. If we look at transparency and accountability, then what is so interesting is that we need reporting mechanisms. And the ones we have at the moment, particularly GDP, is just not the indicator that really helps us, although it's still the dominant indicator. We need economic progress indicators that really show the social and environmental health, well-being. And we need indicators and reporting mechanisms that create trust. But even there, little steps are already happening. I mean, reporting standards, global reporting standards are kind of have been rising. There are kind of clear targets, kind of reporting mechanisms for companies. There is the issue of product traceability. And there are quite a lot of countries, not only those that are kind of in the closer well-being economy government alliance, but also many. Germany, for example, also has well-being indicators. Nobody knows about this, or very few people know about that. But this needs to be enhanced so we can build actually on existing strategies, on existing methodologies, etc. If we look at the principle of distribution and participation, then we really look at democracies or even further forms of democracies, of governance systems for economic policies. We look at wealth distribution measures, and we look at guiding markets. We don't want to destroy markets. We want to enliven markets, but guide markets towards social equality and well-being. And even this, like huge discussions, in every country. But yes, we do already have the mechanisms for distributive tax systems and kind of dividends for commons, etc. We have democratic control of economic strategies that we can learn from, and we have kind of corporate responsibility guidance that we can really, I would say, scale and advance and develop further. So, and if you look at the last one, regulation and contribution, then it's really about these agreements, global agreements. IPCC is constantly reminding us, how important the COP is now happening in Glasgow. Global agreements, binding agreements. But it's also more. We need to look at laws. We need to look at ecocide law. We need to look at the responsibility for future generations built into constitutions, into business laws and into management laws. But even there, we have already bits and pieces that are walking in the right direction, like fiscal policies that incentivize regenerative investment and safeguarding the commons, ecocide laws. And there are countries that have an obligatory contribution of large companies towards society. That's kind of, they need to kind of give a share to the society. So what I'm saying is that there is a lot happening already. So yes, we need to completely rebuild the economic system. We need to work with the parameter, with different parameters, with a new North Star. But it can be done, and we need to actually bring the puzzle of the different approaches together.
Fantastic, thank you. Is there anything you would like to add, especially for children?
I think the most important thing for children, and also for children's education, is that a reorientation and reverence for life, for evolutionary processes. And that is captured, of course, in the interest for nature. Mm-hmm. But I do think we need a new parameter that if I grow up and I go to school, it must be self-evident that I'm responsible for aliveness and vitality, my own, other people's, nature. So that's my job. That's my job. And if I grow up with a job as a small kid and saying, I'm responsible for, making sure that this flower can flower and, kind of this animal. And this is ingrained in us. This is human. This is not something completely new. We are almost like retrained from that initial our initial intention, because every child, you know, loves life, you know, kind of the way a child plays, etc. So we need to actually foster what is already in us in terms of responsibility for life. That's our job. And if we do this throughout small kids education and education of kind of A-level or whatever kind of tertiary education, if this is a parameter, you know, we're responsible for life. Yeah. So and everybody can do it in small bits and pieces. Nobody can be responsible for the planet. So everybody's responsible for, you know, a certain area. I think that would make a huge difference for economic activities.
That's a lovely note. Thank you. And I think the children watching this keynote will love it, to feel themselves as stewards of life, and not in a big way, just concerning the life they are confronted with.
Exactly.
There. So the flowers in the garden and the dog and the sheep and whatever.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Petra. We will talk a little bit further after this keynote. This was lovely, and I think very helpful, especially that you bring in a constructive perspective, a perspective of hope. There is already a beginning there where we can build on, which is important. Thank you so much. We will see you on the conference, right?
Definitely. Thank you.
Lovely.